so many of the things that I had fear for ended up actually being the things that were responsible and complicit for the biggest pieces of my growth. Seeing fear now as something of an invitation to walk toward because of what might be produced in facing it is part of what I think we have as a mandate for anyone who's interested in a fuller, richer life.
Can you maybe talk about some of those kind of inflection points in that transition when maybe you had doubts or you had to really face a challenge and re-surrender to the direction that you were pushing yourself to go? Like, can you talk about that?
Yeah. So doubts are a daily thing. That I wish I could tell you that, like, there's an inflection point where you feel it and then you stop feeling it. You just feel it to varying degrees, and hopefully you're always pushing yourself into new spaces that are just scary enough that you have to confront the inevitable that rears its head. Maybe it's not daily, but it happens more frequently than I think any of us would like to acknowledge. What I think has been interesting in the aftermath of a series of things that have all fit inside of the bucket of change, either change that I've chosen or change that's chosen me, that change is a constant. And the aftermath of change ends up being the reason why becoming has been afforded. Like, I am not who I am in spite of the things that happen in the aftermath of change. I am who I am because of the things that happened after change. I am who I am because of them. And the things that I had fear for in every instance, whether it was leaving Disney and the unknowns that come in entrepreneurship, or having been married and what it means to now not be married when that was such a big part of my primary identity, so many of the things that I had fear for ended up actually being the things that were responsible and complicit for the biggest pieces of my growth. And so in a weird way, seeing fear now as something of an invitation to walk toward because of what might be produced in facing it is part of what I think we have as a mandate for anyone who's interested in a fuller, richer life. At the time when I'm leaving Disney, my biggest fear, to be super honest, was the worry of what other people might think of me making a decision that made sense to me, but not to them, right? I lived inside of a construct that said, here in this hierarchy are the way that we value people. If you got a title that's like this, or access to stars or directors, or get to work on this piece of the business, you are important. I abide by this construct as defining my importance, and you have decided to leave this construct, which is making me question the value that I've placed inside of it. And I was terrified that, of course, I was going to be thought a crazy person, that I would, in some ways, because of that fear, not make the choices that I needed to. And in fact, I didn't leave Disney by probably an extra year's worth of time because of that worry of what people might think, and then was given the gift that someone here today needs to hear. No one was thinking about me in my departure. No one.
Yes.
So any worry that I had afforded any weight to, any time that I wasted in staying longer than I should have, was just that. It was waste. Because in a way that is not in any way trying to diminish them as good people, it's just a part of their humanity, everyone was thinking about themselves in the same way that I'm going to argue everyone listening here primarily is concerned with themselves.
Yeah.
Right? It's just a part of who we are.
As well, they should be.
As well they should be. There's nothing wrong with it. But there's something in ego that says, God, everyone is going to be thinking about me. Everyone's going to be thinking about this. And of course, that's ridiculous, only though after you've tested the hypothesis of it being something that is going to be overwhelmingly scrutinized and realize it isn't, that you're able to see, oh, there's freedom here. I can actually make choices that serve me most because people aren't actually worrying about me. And those that aren't actually in my life. They're around my life. They don't understand my motivation or calling. They don't hear my intuition. They aren't connected to the reason why I was placed here, the idea of honoring the intention of a creator who put you here for a reason and purpose. They don't know those things. And so if someone did have a problem with it or wanted to put something in your comments that was mean or snarky, it's often a reflection of their own insecurity for not having the confidence to take chances in their own life, instead of something that they're actually measuring you against.
So, yeah, and I can only imagine the extent to which your choice at that time from that place, functions sort of operatively as a mirror to a lot of the people around you about their own choices at that time in that place. And why that, maybe some of them would have pretended to be upset at you, not themselves, or, whatnot. Right. But like you say, I mean, nobody else's fulfillment is reliant on our feelings. So we can do what we feel. Right. But,
I'll just say this too, though, because I think this is an important thing for anyone to hear. The hardest pieces of other people's opinions that you do have to deal with, because there were some people that were thinking, and they tended to be the people that I was closest to, loved, craved love from, who were representing their love as love, but it was actually fear, right? It was their fear that was speaking. It was their own limiting beliefs. It was their own scarcity mindset. It was their own history and programming of how you're supposed to be as a man, or as an earner, or as someone who's connected to certainty. And so having a conversation with my parents, who are amazing and are so supportive, this didn't make sense to them. Having a conversation with the head of the Walt Disney Company at the time, like at least the head of the studio, his response was about provision. Like, I know that I can provide for you, but can you provide for yourself in the way that I can provide for you? And I was like, respectfully, I appreciate that, but that's scarcity. Like, you have come at this from limiting. I am coming at this from empowering. I need to go do this to save my life. And in being saved, I know that I can generate earning, because I'll be connected better to passion and to fulfillment and to a whole version of me that's excited to show up.
Well, and the irony is that he could not provide for you in the way that you could provide for yourself. He was just he was speaking in a very narrow term instead of in terms of currency, right? But
right.
Which I totally get, because I went on this crazy odyssey myself and started running around with a cell phone, shooting videos, about whatever musings I was having. And people like, you're wasting time. You're 39. This is like your prime potential time of your life. And you're wasting it trying to become an influencer or something. It's like, no, this isn't for them. This is for me. So I totally get it. So I know that you used to be kind of call it growth, personal development, vulnerability. You were in your Disney days. I've read a lot about things you said about, what you were like then. And can you talk a little bit about, like, what got you heading in this direction? And then also, when did you stop fighting it and go, oh, okay, life could be better over there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for a huge chunk of life, I was very much a fixed mindset person. I'd been gifted with a certain amount of gifts. I used them well. When I put effort into things I knew I could do well, I did well. And it became something of a self-fulfilling thing. As long as I stayed in my lane, I could stack wins in spaces that were safer, that played to my competencies and strengths. And I built a good career out of it. I found my way through entertainment for a little more than 20 years worth of time, the last 17 of which, as you say, was at the Walt Disney Company. And by focusing on my ability to communicate, manage relationships, influence stakeholders, I just continued to find myself in jobs that were allowing me to continue to climb a ladder and have more and more success. But I found myself, as I was turning 40, running into some bigger existential questions about why the heck I was on the planet, and why some of the success that had been achieved didn't feel as fulfilling as had been billed, either by society or by a younger version of me having cast these goals. If I could just get to that table, get to that status, get to that title, salary, then I'm going to feel all the things I've always dreamt of feeling. And I got to a lot of those places, and those things did not pay the way that I was hoping for them to. And in a conversation about unlocking potential, it was actually a conversation around potential that became a big catalyst for thinking differently about so much of what I had. I was in a bit of a funk, a lot of a funk, right around this 40th birthday. I'd been now 3 years into the last 7 of my time at the Walt Disney Company, where I was head of sales, this president of distribution. And I was feeling lost in so many ways, because of the accumulated talent, the best collection of intellectual property, arguably in the history of Hollywood. You had Pixar, Marvel, Disney, and Lucas. Great team, great leadership. I found myself getting straight A grades without having to study for tests. And that, like, absence of challenge or growth or whatever it was complicit in me not feeling great about myself when I was by myself. And I'm in my backyard in the midst of this funk, playing a game with my 3 younger kids, 9, 7, and 4 at the time. My 7-year-old asks me this question: "Hey, Dad, what's your biggest fear?" And out of my mouth was not living up to my potential. He's looking for something silly or ridiculous. And this unconscious thing that had been living inside of me now has become conscious. It's in the light. And in saying it out loud, I can see that, oh, I am also in real time not living up to my potential. I'm living into my greatest fear. And bringing that into the light now was a thing I saw and couldn't unsee, and it required taking some kind of action. Okay, how am I going to address the fact that I've built success by a whole host of other people's markers, but find myself unfulfilled, separated from calling or purpose, and I'm struggling to feel pride because of a lack of effort or an absence of growth. And the decision for me then was, oh, well, I got to jump into something new. I got to do something unconventional, leave my safe harbor, my comfort zone. And it's that choice back in 2017, 18, to leave the Walt Disney Company and start doing this work that was the beginning of this thing that you describe, which is living life and learning about the way that growth is a thing that can actually produce the kind of fulfillment that you'd hope for, and doing it transparently in a way that also recognizes very much the three-word moniker that I identify myself with most, work in progress. I'm very much on a perpetual journey of becoming, and those words, work in progress, were a thing that I demonized. I thought were a pejorative that made me a bad or not yet full, whole person. And now I see them as something of a badge of honor. Like, of course, this is a journey of always becoming and always being something of a work in progress. I've just decided to have, as a part of my career, sharing the journey and its messiness and its failures and the learning that come in trying new things publicly, in a way that maybe, hopefully, has people seeing themselves in my stories and normalizes a little bit of the nonlinear nature of becoming who we're ultimately meant to be.
It's funny. Yeah. So I was first exposed to you probably about a year ago. My business partner in my company, Entra, which I'm wearing the sweatshirt.
Very nice.
Yeah, his wife in particular had been a fan of your work with your now ex-wife, Rachel. And, so when I don't remember how you came up. It was like, I think it might've been talking about this show, like, oh, you should see if you get, one of the Hollises on the podcast or something. They're really cool. And I was like, and then I started looking in, I'm like, oh my gosh. Like I said, I feel like Dave, in a way, you're like a year ahead of where I was. Cause for me, it was right around 2018, 2019, 39-year-old, successful, affluent, white guy, what we can just sort of like half jokingly call midlife crisis, existential. What the hell am I doing with my life? Yeah, it's like almost the same thing. And I like went on this journey, same thing, started putting out content, growing myself, discovering myself, finding myself. And a lot of personal development's nothing new, and we don't get a badge for doing it. But the idea of throwing ourselves open to invite everyone else in to come with us. That's what I did about 3 years ago. Like I said, you're at about 4. And so I feel this, and it's interesting. I'm curious if you experience it the same way. Like, it is the most simultaneously fulfilling and terrifying thing possible, or that I've ever experienced, not to be growing, but to be growing with people watching.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, what's interesting is like my decision to grow or embrace a growth mindset or dip my toe into personal development, a thing that I'd had so much skepticism about for my entire life, was born out of desperation. Like, I made some choices in leaving Disney. I made some choices in investing in conferences and books and thinking differently about mindset because I needed to save my life in some respects. Like, it sounds a little hyperbolic and I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I think you're either growing or dying. And I was very much in a season of dying because I'd absolutely stopped growing. And the decision to show up for my life and model the adulthood that I'd hope my children to ultimately grow into and feel proud of myself when I'm by myself and all these things, it came out of desperation. I needed to do it. But doing it in some ways for the very first time in my life, and also deciding to show other people how I was experiencing it, well, I had not yet developed, forget mastery, I just didn't have any competence at all in what it meant to try these things or learn in these new ways or not revert back to some of the muscle memory that had governed my life for all of my adult life, which meant inevitably, of course, I'm going to get it wrong, or I'm going to be triggered. And as much as I want to tell you, hey, here's an answer, I'm also going to be as much a student as I am attempting to teach at the same time. And holding space for both of those is hard, because I think, especially inside of a business that in so many ways has so many experts who have themselves been engaged in this for so many years, decades at times, being someone who's willing to say, look, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to share with you the things that have worked for me so far. I am, in fact, a work in progress. I am, in fact, both teacher and student, is a request for the audience to think differently about how they might put on a pedestal the way that you are attempting to introduce your ideas or your books or your podcasts to them. Because I'm the first to admit that I think I have a lot of the answers, but I also don't yet have the discipline to follow them as frequently as I wish I did, because of my humanity, because of still developing routines and habits that stick, because of still attempting to create that integrity in the promises that I keep to myself that actually keep me on the road that I'd hope to be on. And there's something in that I think ends up also, by the way, being refreshing. Oh, wow, there's a human on the other side of this conversation that makes me feel okay for also being human. But it also inevitably opens you up for criticism from anyone who would say, hey, what right do you have to have a podcast or write a book or teach a lesson inside of coaching? And you have to decide, hey, this is the price of entry. You're willing to weather that until you have enough reps in, until you have enough time under your belt where you do have the accountability partners and the discipline and the frequency of maintaining that integrity in a way that makes you feel a little more like you've developed mastery in growth. I'm not sure that I'm ever going to get there. And I'm okay saying it. Like, I think I'm always going to be both teacher and student, and I'm fine with it, because it's been the most incredible, I feel most connected to who I'm ultimately meant to be, kind of 2-3 year journey for me. And I think it's probably going to be my story for the rest of time.
Well, it's interesting. English is, and particularly, I think where we're at now in English speaking culture and society, like people are meant to be that guy or that girl. In fact, one of the things I was really confronting when I was building out my business and the, Entre Institute, what it's intended to be, is I'm like, there's so much that it takes for people to become successful. Even if we were to just focus on the professional categories, you've got sales, you've got digital marketing, you've got personal development, you've got communication, you've got financial literacy, and that's just professional. And then we get into personal excellence, and we get into even just physical and wellness and self-care. And nobody wants to hear about all of that from like one person.
Yeah.
Because you're meant to be a person who's a specialist in a thing, and you're only qualified to teach a thing, and everything else you need to defer to other experts on. That's one of the reasons I founded an institute instead of just being Jeff Lerner. But one of the interesting things that I think has been lost in that, one of the nuances, is that the word student and the word teacher, that is an artificial dichotomy.
Yeah.
And so I'm blessed because my last name is Lerner, which is actually a Yiddish word that means Talmudic scholar who is both student and teacher. So I've always had this sense that I'm meant to learn and share what I'm learning, not with a claim to any sort of supreme authority, but just more invitationally and like, hey, let's learn together. And that's actually what teaching is. But nowadays you get shot down. If you don't have PhD or you didn't found $1 billion company, it's like, oh, you're not allowed to teach me anything. You're just a student.
Yeah. What's I think interesting too, like at the beginning of my book, there's a note to the reader. Like, I am super clear with anyone that is going to be in community with me, what they're getting from this guy, the student and teacher, which is like, look, I had fear as the most frequent emotion in my life for most of my life, which makes me, having written a book about courage, a thing that I grapple with in real time. And yet I feel really confident that there are things in here that you can take away, but recognize that they're coming from someone who's still learning it as he goes, and there's, I hope anyway, a community of people who are looking for something in that relatability that comes in the humanity of student and teacher, or the kind of connective tissue that might be, yeah, you know what, someone who's human who also struggles every once in a while, or falls off track and has to work on getting back up, or is willing to admit that there's still some negative coping mechanisms that when triggered I rely on, and I wish they didn't exist, but sure they do. That in some ways there might be a path for an empathy bridge that says, come along this journey, let's walk it together, and acknowledge that we're going to do this imperfectly, but we're going to just keep going and do it.
Yeah, I think this is such an appropriate conversation for this platform. A lot of the audience for this show are people that find me through Entre. So a lot of students who end up just becoming, regular listeners of the show. And even just beyond that, who we attract a lot of are people that are, and this is a lot more common now than it was when I started the show, because since I started the show, we've gone through the Great Resignation. But it's people that are looking for that shift, people that are looking for that pivot or that evolution that, frankly, you embody really well, going from very successful corporate executive, all the prestige, not just successful financially, but I mean, you had a cool job. Like, you were like the guy that launched the Avengers movies and stuff, right? Like, and to shift from that to where you are now, I think and to admit that it was terrifying, that you were scared all the while. That I think that's exactly where so many of the listeners are, is like, I want to move into this next chapter that's about a more holistic definition of fulfillment, but I'm really, really scared. That was 2017. Is that when you left Disney?
So 2017, I have the decision with my then wife to make this big leap, get myself leveraged by actually buying the house that I'm currently sitting in Austin, Texas, or outside of, and then wait 4 or 5 months until January of 2018 to actually have the conversation. It goes well. We decide on a term that I can help onboard my successor. And then it was in June of 2018 that I made the big official leap, even though I was doing some parallel work in both sides for the first part of the year. Okay.
So 2018, make that transition. How smoothly would you say it went into, both pragmatically and call it financially, and then also just personally, and changing your habits and your identity too?
Unsmoothly is how it went.
That's how smoothly, not at all.
Yeah, not smoothly. And the thing is, it wasn't maybe even necessarily apparent to the outside world, because there, I think, was excitement in an audience who'd already been following and a part of a community that my wife had, that was adopting me over time as we went on this adventure to try to create tools for people. And there was some momentum in inertia in the market, because a book that ended up becoming very successful of hers called Grow Wash Your Face.
When did she publish that?
So it came out February, March of 2018. So like, we'd made the decision before. Good news, this book takes off and ends up, like, providing the business with a whole bunch of capital for us to scale and grow, and new audience, because the book ended up selling 4 or 5 million copies in that first 12 months, a unicorn black swan kind of event. But it also meant that, hey, these new people coming in, they liked something that was offered in this thing that you created. Maybe there's something else that we can put in front of them that would satisfy additional needs that they have because of some strengths that we can put in front of them. And so it was great, but there was still a lot of uncertainty around what this business would be as we were trying to get ready for June of 2018. The book, as much as it became successful, didn't hit the New York Times list until months into its release. And so it had an unconventional sales curve. And in that unconventionality, left us trying to figure out what the heck we were going to do. For me, there was a couple of things that were interesting. One, the absence of what had been identity in my proximity to talent, or my title, or Disney as a moniker that would be the first thing I might introduce myself as at a cocktail party, was somewhat hard, because there was significance in that. And I had not yet established anything in this new thing, this decision as to, I couldn't even prove that it was sane, let alone successful. And so there was, I think, something jarring in that. But even beyond that, I mistook that the success that existed in leading people a certain way at the Walt Disney Company would transfer to scaling a team inside of entrepreneurship. And it was just bad math, in that I was the beneficiary of a big team that had a lot of experience and had been, because of their tenure, exposed to the kind of problems that present themselves in the business so often that they had what I would describe as a nose for smoke. They could sniff out where fire might pop up and usually preemptively extinguish it before it showed up. So the way I led them was differently. I wasn't telling them necessarily about smoke or the direction to look for fire. They were coming and talking to me about the reason why smoke presented itself, and we were brainstorming how to keep it from smoldering back up or starting again in the future. In entrepreneurship, I had people that had never even been inside of the forest, let alone smelled smoke or seen fire. And so the frequency of fires that we were experiencing and trying new things in new spaces with people that themselves were newer to some of what we were trying to pull off in digital products or live events or any of the things. It was not something I could be hands off with. And I was definitely more of a, I'll give you the autonomy and rope to figure out how to best solve the problems of the business. Come back and report to me with what's going on and we'll figure out what to do. I don't know. This was we got to be together holding the hose because there's a lot of water that's required for these fires. I was given, I mean, if there was a thing that was just such a blessing in all of it, I had this opportunity right around this like frequency of fires thing where I was really being hard on myself. Like, am I the right leader? Is there something wrong with me that I'm not able to preempt the frequency of things happening in a way that doesn't serve the business, or at least I didn't believe served the business? And I ended up backstage at an event where Rachel was speaking with John Maxwell, bemoaning kind of like what was going on. And he said something that was so simple, but so freeing. It was like, look, you can have either consecutive good days, or you can run a small business, but you can't have both. So the price of entry for doing what you're doing is fire.
Yeah.
And of course, as it would turn out, most of the innovation that came in systems and process and people, product design, service to customers, all of them were born out of extinguishing a fire. And so it was also about just reframing the idea of these things not working perfectly as being bad for the business. No, this was exactly what the business needed, even if it was uncomfortable to have to deal with them in real time.
Well, probably not on this podcast, because it's such a bespoke thing. I would love to have a conversation with you about the intricacies and the challenges of rapidly scaling an information marketing business, because I'm right there with you on that. I mean, you know, we've built a 200-person information marketing company in less than 3 years, and it's like you said, I'm waiting to have a few consecutive good days. Honestly, there's like fires. You can't see them; they're right over there. But trust me, they're roaring. But it's fun. You know, I know I'm alive every day for sure. Hey, sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to let you know you can get a free copy of my book, The Millionaire Shortcut, which shows you the fastest way to become a millionaire in the new economy. And there's a special link just for this episode in the description. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. You know, I was doing some prep for this conversation. I read an article, I don't remember what it was. And you said something, you said that you realized recently, I don't know how recently, but since the split with Rachel, which by the way, it's just I mean, I've been divorced twice, but nobody knew who I was when I was divorced. I just want to acknowledge you for having to go through what you've been going through, which I guarantee you was both of your faults, because it always is, doesn't matter.
Yep.
With so many people watching. I mean, has anybody just stopped and like given you a hug? Other than probably Heidi?
It's so funny because it is something that tends to come up more and more, this like recognition of, man, having to go through the hardest thing I've ever experienced privately was tough. What the heck did it feel like publicly? And as much as I don't know that I would have necessarily opted to have to experience it publicly, it wasn't all bad necessarily. I mean, I don't like people taking swipes. I just wish people would maybe recognize that there's a human on the other side of the screen, or just choose kindness. But also,
by the way, everybody listening, choose kindness. We are humans. It actually does hurt, even when we act really tough. Just, you know,
that's
public
real.
Commentary.
It's a real thing. But also, bizarrely for me, there was something cathartic almost in sharing a little bit of this journey that, as much as so at the end of 2019, I made this bold declaration, hey, 2020 is gonna be my best year. I was for the first time going to be an author, for the first time going to be coaching in a digital products kind of world. I was for the first time helming a podcast. Like I'm doing all these first time things, feel called into becoming more of a face of our business as opposed to an operator integrator of the business. And I made this declaration. And what I didn't appreciate was that I didn't get a say in the conditions that would bring my best forward. And so in a weird way, divorce, as much as it wasn't a thing that I wanted, I would have fought to not get divorced. I have an appreciation for how right the decision was on the other side of having survived it. But so many of the things that came out of it, being brought to my knees, closer to faith, being forced with kids that were also walking through trauma, drew me closer to them. The way that focus on health was able to build something of a foundation that would allow me to actually get out of bed, create some momentum, keep on going. It just changed so much of who I am into how I am today. Having a community of people that I was able to share some of this experience with in a weird way made me feel a little less alone. And because there's a universal nature to struggle, certainly 2020 wasn't a year that any of us were necessarily enjoying, being able to share a little bit, hard, not hard, good, the messy middle. In some ways, I think it kind of gave people permission to feel okay with not being totally okay, feel okay with the nonlinear, 3, 4, 5 good days in a row gives way to a couple of bad days. And you are just like, if I can get out of bed today, this is going to be a win kind of day. Like normalizing that in the world that we were all experiencing collectively in 2020, I think ended up being something of a gift. And so anyway, I hope you don't have to experience the hardest thing that you go through publicly, but if you do, there are some things that I think end up also maybe presenting themselves as an opportunity to feel a shared sense of humanity and some connection with other people that have likely gone through it, and some of the advice that might come from some of their insights now that they're further along their own journey. Yeah,
I mean, I guess you're right. You did pick as years go, you picked probably a decent one to struggle in public because there was a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. So anyway, to my question that I interrupted myself to say that about or within, my question was this. So I read that you said that you had at one point you felt like one thing you had learned in hindsight was that you had made the mistake of chasing your wife's goals and vision instead of and I wrote this down, instead of identifying the calling that God had placed before you.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, when you left Disney, it sounds like you left Disney because you had, and I'm going to put words in your mouth, so forgive me, but you had made the mistake of chasing society's goals and vision, or your family's goals and vision for your life, or the people that love you, or or whatever cultures. You'd made the mistake of chasing that vision instead of identifying the calling God placed before you. And then your first feint at doing so or writing that was to go, but it's almost like you made the same mistake again.
Yeah.
Only now it wasn't society. Now it was just your wife. And now second time's the charm. Now it's time for Dave to focus on his true calling. I mean, is that an accurate summation?
Yeah. What's interesting is in the midst of that first leap from Disney, again, like the decision for growth and the decision to leave came in some respects out of midlife crisis, funk, like me feeling stuck, a season of not growing, so I'm dying. And so there was something in like I needed to do it. I needed to do it to save my life. And in the midst of the decision, some of what had been compromised by the funk was an imagination for what next could look like if it was going to be so different than what it was currently. I'd recognized that impact felt like an ingredient that wasn't necessarily super present as much as, I was impacting my team, or the results that we were creating inside of the Walt Disney Company were impacting shareholder value. Right. I didn't feel connected necessarily to impacting people in a way that I thought if I could would change the way that I felt connected to calling and purpose. And I knew for sure that my wife, she's at the time and was my wife now, my ex-wife, but like irrespective, she's a world changer. She's just like been given gifts. She wields those gifts. They have had unbelievable impact on the people that she has been able to present them to. And so I thought, you know what? Impact, even if it comes through her as the vessel, is impact. And I'm excited and interested in seeing what it feels like to connect to something that changes people's lives. And so I made the leap. And I, not for 1 second do I begrudge pursuing her vision or her dreams, because there was so much good that came from it, but also proximity to what ultimately felt more like my calling was the gift that came in that pursuit. And it wasn't until, I mean, this is a bizarre story, but I happened to, God moment, serendipitously, Providence, whatever you want to call it. I was sat on a plane next to Dan Rather.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in the midst of this, like, you know, feeling like I was being called to write this first book or do this coaching. And here I am sitting next to him. He was my childhood hero, just as a sign of how dorky I was growing up. And I break every plane protocol that exists, ask him if he's, you know, open to a conversation. 2 hours later, we get done. Lovely, unbelievable, exceeds expectations. I get off the plane and I have this deep sense of finally connecting to who I wanted to be before I became who I'd become. That somewhere along the way, I started climbing a ladder that had a carrot being dangled at every rung, that if I just were to get to that next rung, finally, the fulfillment or the connection to purpose or calling that I'd been hoping to connect to would finally be unlocked. And then I got to near the top of that ladder, and I finally had this recognition of, oh my goodness, I've climbed the wrong ladder. This is not where I'm meant to be climbing. I need to find a different ladder. And so I jumped into something that was in fact my wife's vision, but it wasn't like as connected to what I believe to be a calling in my life, where I'm a reporter, for lack of a better word. I am trying to take the collective experiences of my life, of my growth journey, of the thing that I either am learning from other people or in my own failure and the learning that comes from having made mistakes and learning myself, and aggregate it in a way that someone can maybe see a little bit of themselves in my story, challenged to think a little bit differently, but I'm a reporter. And that's who I wanted to be at 19 when I'm going to college and I'm working behind the desk as a news anchor. I'm doing a 2 a.m. radio disc jockey show where I'm using this gift to speak and my ability to collect stories and storytell. And so as I realized, oh man, this is the thing I want to do, instead of now continuing to pursue building out a company exclusively, the question is, how do you step in, Dave, and allow some of these gifts that you've been given to present in the way that maybe allows breakthrough for other people? And here I am.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I just have to comment, you know, you're talking about being a reporter, and there's kind of this seems to be this connection between growth and sharing. And as we were talking, I realized, oh, it's the inverse of your secrets keep you sick.
Yeah.
Like there's something about staying stuck or like, you know, growth versus decay. There's something about decay and hoarding, the inverse of which is growth and sharing. And I know that a lot of people, the response or you know, conversations I have, a lot of people are kind of like, Jeff, how do you share? How are you like always on, or you're sharing so much, you produce so much content, or you're like this fertile, active creativity. And it's like, no, this is actually, for me, it would feel stifling to not share it.
Yeah.
The growth and the transparency are two sides of the same coin. And I'm wondering if you feel that same way, like you couldn't do what you're doing if you tried to wall it off.
Oh, absolutely. And what's interesting is, like, I think we're raised in so many ways to believe that we have to present in certain ways to be seen as strong. And yet the strongest I've ever felt and the most free from shame I've ever felt is when I've acknowledged the thing that I've had shame for in a way that allows me to take power from it and be proud of the progress I'm making to work on it. Even if it means having to acknowledge stuff that I'm not that proud of, or that I wish were better, or that I wish I hadn't made mistakes around. When I've been able to transparently own that, that is when I'm at my strongest. In some ways, because I'm now creating integrity between who I know myself to be privately and who I'm representing myself to be publicly. And in that state of integrity, I at least am being seen for me. I am at least telling a story that feels honest and integrous with who I really am and how I'm really learning, and not some kind of spin of what I think people want to hear, or something that I think I can convince them of to potentially sell something. Mm-hmm.
So I want to make sure we talk about, and I think this kind of naturally brings us right to, you have a brand new book that just came out, what, about 7 weeks ago, maybe 7-8 weeks?
Yeah.
Built through courage. Can you talk a little bit about it? what went into it? Why did you need to write it? And, frankly, what's in it for people to go read it?
Yeah. So like at the very, very most basic, it's the ask if you would consider getting hyper self-aware with where you are. Like, where are you right now? What's working? Maybe more importantly, what is not working well? How have you, in your relationship to yourself, your identity, your experiences, the way that you love or are unable to love yourself, the way that you have good or bad habits, the way that you have positive or negative coping mechanisms, how are you currently doing? And once you've started there, going on a journey to try and cast a vision for what you believe to be the calling of life, the thing that you are meant to do, the thing that you are meant to be, and do so in a way that runs like a movie in your head, allows you to get detailed and specific about what it is, but also allows you to get really, really specific about what it's going to take to get there. And so the conversation is one that has chronicled in some ways this thing I described, the change that I've chosen or change that's chosen me, and does so through a bunch of nautical metaphors about moving away from your safe harbor, comfort zone, into the choppy waters that change inevitably introduce, so that in that choppiness, in that disruption and disorientation, you are able to build strength, grit, resilience, add new skills, develop mastery in a way that has you taking a step closer to who you're meant to be. The conceit of the book in many ways also is just this idea that you were created with very specific purpose. You were done so by a creator that knew what they were doing when they did it. And that part of our responsibility is to take steps every day to live in integrity that might honor the intention of that creator. And that's, if you don't know where you are, you can't do that. If you don't know where you're going, you can't do that. If you don't know what it's going to take, you can't do that. And so the hope in the book is that through the storytelling, through some of the frameworks, through what ends up being a more active learning journaling prompt at the end of each chapter, you're able to dive a little bit deeper and do the work, figure out what it's going to take to show up today so that you can become who you're meant to be tomorrow.
It's interesting you chose a nautical metaphor. So much of my audience is entrepreneurs. Obviously, I run an entrepreneurial, learning platform, and entrepreneurship in its etymological origins. I mean, technically, entreprendre is a French word for undertake, but if you really split it apart into entre and prendre, and you trace the origins of the words, it actually means it derives partially, at least. Again, I'm a word nerd, so I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, well, be technically precise because it doesn't 100% derive, blah, blah, blah. But part of the origin of the word entrepreneur involves swimming out from safe shore into waters to grasp, prendre, to grasp something that is out in the treacherous waves and waters and bring it back to shore for those who are too scared to swim out themselves. That's actually entrepreneurship. And so
good.
Yeah, without planning or preparation, I will just validate that you just validated my belief that entrepreneurship is, at least metaphorically, one of the greatest ways that people can force themselves into this journey, force themselves out of safe harbor. And certainly it seems like that's what you've experienced, leaving the safe confines of Disney. So I know we only have a few minutes left. I have to ask, so I've seen your podcast, and I noticed, and I was scrolling through on your podcast, and I saw this little doodle of you. It said Dave and John, or John and Dave. I'm like, oh, that's John. That's John Acuff. He was just on the show like a few weeks ago, maybe.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing, because I'm a fan of both of you, and now I'm like going to tune in.
Yeah, what's crazy is friendship was born out of a conversation happening just like this. He'd come on my show as his book, Soundtracks, was coming out. Mm-hmm. And as we were finishing, they had done recording, we had one of these conversations that was like, you ever get that feeling that you're just going to be friends with someone? And I was like, yeah. Do you want to build a bunk bed? Like, should we go do some karate? Right. It felt very Step Brothers-esque. And so
oh yeah.
We just started a text conversation that led to intermittent, hey, jump into my live, I'll jump into your live, to formalizing the relationship, as it were, what has just become a fun thing that we call Fridays with John and Dave, or the John and Dave Show. And it's just, hey, we're going live on Fridays at this same time. It's 30 minutes. It is a Seinfeld-esque kind of show about nothing. John tends to bring a handful of questions, and it's rapid fire ridiculousness that goes all over the board. Sometimes we get serious, and most times it's pretty light, but he's just such a rad dude. And it just seems like fun to not keep doing it once we started.
Yeah, no, I'll admit I was a little jealous when I saw you have a recurring beat with him. Because I had so much fun talking to him, and he was, like you said, he was one that I was like, yeah, I need to stay in touch.
Oh yeah,
with this guy. He's such just a wonderful human. I guess you might have had some trademark issues if you tried to call your show Prestige Worldwide, right?
Also true. True. I wish we had though, but still, you're right.
Well, cool. Listen, we're about out of time. Please share with the audience how they can get deeper in your world. Obviously, also the book and anything else that you would like them to share or know.
Right on. I mean, I hang out primarily on Instagram. I've seen your stuff all the time. Great content. But my handle is Mr. Dave Hollis. I have a website, mrdavehollis.com, that details all the fun stuff that I'm up to. Got a men's conference coming up here in February. There's a fitness challenge that jumps off in January. But anyway, you can jump over there. You mentioned the podcast. It happens on Thursdays, right where you can listen to this one. It's called Rise Together. Parting thoughts. I mean, we finished with the nautical theme. I'll give you my tattoo, a thing that has been part of a mantra in my life. It's a John Shedd quote, and it says, "A ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for." I got it in many ways, akin to your entrepreneurship definition, like to remind myself that the life that I want, the growth that I'm interested in, the connection to fulfillment or purpose that is part of my North Star, it all lives out in those choppy waters. But maybe more than that, I got it because there are plenty of days where I wake up frightened by, overwhelmed by, questioning my ability to handle those choppy waters. And I have to have that reminder that I was built for this. And so for anyone who's listening today, you like that ship, you were built to be out at sea. Believe that. If that was a single thing that you worked on, it would change every other thing in your life. And I know that I am. I know too that you are. You were put here for purpose. That purpose is to leave the harbor and get out in those choppy waters.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely gonna love this one. Check it out.
I don't believe in writer's block. I believe in idea bankruptcy. My business is built off the strength of my ideas. If you are casual about your ideas, you will write a crappy book. So the first step is you gather ideas. Great, easy way to do that is to say, what's a question that won't leave me alone?